back everyone to today's interview. Today I have another special guest and her name is Heidi Kunzelman. And it was actually a very big pleasure to meet her actually last week and to discuss, getting to know each other and having our introductions there. But I thought that she would be a perfect person to kind of be in this interview, sharing her expertise and experiences. And just to introduce her, she is the founder of thinkgerman.at, and she's also working as a German language coach for international knowledge workers, and she's also an academic writer. So welcome, Heidi, to today's interview. Thank you very much for attending. And is there anything that you might want to add from what I've already said? Feel free.
Thank you.
Just very looking forward to continue the
Pleased to be here. Thank you very much for doing this and for asking me what I'm sure will be interesting questions. It's a pleasure meeting you too online. It has to be online at this time of year, but it's probably a good thing because we can share our stories with many more people out there, 100%. People who read your blog. Thanks for introducing me. I am indeed working as a German coach at the moment. I'm currently based in Vienna, like you, and I offer a number of services. I was an academic for the best part of my adult life for the past 20 years, actually, and I've now changed my career. And what I do is, and you said it already, I provide a highly tailored and very flexible German coaching service to knowledge workers, to people in the knowledge industries, to highly skilled migrants, as it were. My German coaching, it's language coaching, it's more than a language class, is centered on what I call crucial conversations, the crucial conversations these people want to have or will have in the near and distant future when they've arrived in a German-speaking world. And crucial conversations are moments, specific moments of communication where something is at stake for the people. And these communicative situations can be very different in nature. You just have to put yourself into the shoes of somebody who probably does not necessarily speak German very well, but even if people speak German very well, they can still get into situations where they interpret signs, intercultural signs wrongly, and I help people understand that, and we'll do this in English. So these conversations can be lectures they give in German, they can be research-related discussions or interviews, can be tricky conversations with a neighbor in Viennese dialect. I'm sure you have had your share of Viennese encounters there. I build my sessions around that, and I build them around the linguistic needs of the people, and we identify these needs at the beginning of the run of the sessions. Now, the aim of what I do and what I put all my energy into now is the aim for my client is that they are able to independently then walk away and use these linguistic strategies and the intercultural strategies that we've practiced in other everyday situations in Vienna or in Bonn or in Berlin or wherever they are. I cater for the German-speaking environment in general. That's one thing I do. I also offer B2B services, business-to-business services, and that's mainly English-speaking seminars for international members of staff, for German linguistic and intercultural competence for Austrian and German universities and research institutions, research centers, or research-led businesses mainly. And these seminars are usually part of the onboarding processes of these institutions, and they help international members of staff navigate their arrival, if you will, in their German-speaking host culture. That's the idea. So that's what I do now, but I used to be, and I still am actually, a literate scholar. I'm in German, Germanistic. So that's my other life.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you for that very
That's right.
holistic, comprehensive background, and very excited about the current projects you do. And thank you as well for your work as a German coach and also with your startup, thinkgerman.at, because for me, when I was learning German in the very beginning, I would have loved somebody who really gave me a tailored approach to my learning progress. So thank you for doing this. And why not, let's jump into our first question then.
Yeah.
So as you're working in this language field, specifically German, I guess I can connect this to the first question, which is, what does culture mean to you? So you're more familiar with the German culture, but in the general aspect, what does culture, this word, mean to you?
Well, when I saw this, I mean, I think I'm allowed to share that we've talked a little bit about questions, and culture is such a big word and such a big concept. And if I were able to answer your question comprehensively now, I would probably win a research prize, because it's so difficult to it's different for everyone, and yet there are concepts and ideas about this concept that we share. I'll try. Culture for me and to me is a shared, a collective knowledge of how to interpret specific behavior and patterns. I think patterns of behavior and human activity in the group that we live in a culture, and it's fed by traditions. It's fed by an overall knowledge of red tape, the do's and don'ts. It's fed by language, obviously, by shared stories and narratives. And culture, to me, and I suppose to others too, is maintained by symbolic structures mainly. So these structures, they frame these traditions, they frame these stories and narratives as something important. And when we read them, hear them, when we talk about them, we know that this is shared and this is collective, and a bigger group of people we may not know takes part in it. That's culture to me. There is. I also thought about an approach that I could introduce to you and to whoever's listening that I quite like. And I've recently come across a cultural theorist. We call him. He's living and working in Japan. So he's actually right now he's there and he's quite active. And it's called Joseph Scholz. Schaules. He's fantastic. I think I love his books and I love what he's doing, and I like his approach to culture, because he says it's something that we can unlock for ourselves on various levels, and we have to unlock on various levels. And he talks about something he calls deep culture as opposed to superficial culture. And he says you may have come across his work. Perhaps he says that we can gain intercultural awareness if we get to and if we accept that there is a level of deep culture.
Yes.
And the patterns that I mentioned before, the patterns that we share, these reside in a foreign culture. These reside on that level of deep culture, and sometimes they may, if we engage with them for the first time in the foreign culture, they may put us off, and they may deepen our prejudices and stereotypes. And he says it's important to actually get to this deep level of culture and then understanding to that deep level. And I quite like that.
Yeah.
I think,
100%, yes. Is it the iceberg model that he's referring to in terms of the surface and the
It's part of that, but he's taking it further. Actually, he says it's a cognitive level. He attaches it to ideas of how our brains work in neurosciences, and he's actually looking at the way culture is, and he says and maintains to a certain degree culture is maintained and is governed by cognitive processes in the brain too, and this deep level. Is bringing in these ideas of the iceberg model, where you have religion and stuff above the water, and then important aspects below the water.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning this aspect, because there has been a lot of important research and work currently based on the neurological and basically the functions that our brains okay, basically the neurological aspects of how it connects to the intercultural work and how that may affect our perceptions as well as deconstruction of how we communicate across cultures. So thank you very much for mentioning that.
Indeed.
And I guess the next question is, what would you say is a thought or an experience or an event that influenced or shifted your perspective on culture? So you may have already answered this, or if not, please feel free to let me know.
I think I can give you an idea that has impacted me quite a bit, and that is just generally the concept of culture shock. I find that really interesting, and what really changed my perception on culture is the fact that everybody goes through culture shock, no matter who they are, no matter how aware they are of the process. You cannot run away from it. If you change your culture, your environment, the patterns that you know, and you move on to something new, you will go through a kind of wave of emotion, and I think that really hit home when I changed my culture for the first time. I heard about it in theory as a student, and I heard about it. I even heard that there is a reverse culture shock when you come back to your country of origins, and where you've grown up. I mean, I know this is different, very different for TCKs, but this has shaped my view on culture enormously. We are not aware of that process, and yet we go through it because we have to, because it has to do with roots and uprooting and forming new roots, and that really that's something that interests me, and something that also moves me to a certain degree, because it's you have to help people through this process, and it's easier if somebody else is there, makes you aware of it, and says, look, this is happening to you.
I agree. And talking about roots and placing yourself in different positions and countries, let's talk about your career. So how did you actually start as a German coach? How did you place that route from your career-wise experience?
Yeah, well, as I said before, I've been an academic teacher and researcher for the best part of the past 20 years now, and I've lived abroad as well for most of my adult working life in the US and the United Kingdom, and I've always, I mean, obviously I've always found culture interesting in literature. I've studied and written about my own culture from an outer perspective, away from Austria. I've written about Austrian literature, and it was a very interesting approach already. And my own country's culture, literary and artistic production was looked at from the perspective of an expat, somebody who's moved away, and allowed me to be quite critical of it, perhaps critical in a different way than people who are here who do the same thing. And in the course of that, I've also worked with a lot of students, obviously, many students and colleagues on their experience of the German-speaking world and of Austrian culture during their course of their degrees. And I thought this is something that I really enjoy. This bridge building is something that I really enjoy, and I have benefited greatly from their experience for my own work, because they allowed me to look beyond what we call Tellerrand, beyond the limitations of my view of my own country. And I benefited greatly from exchange with my students and my colleagues who had gone to Austria and Germany and come back. And finally, when I decided to come back to Austria, I thought long and hard about how language and coaching and teaching are related. They are twin sisters, if you will. And I realized that I could use my own experiences in that field as an academic, but also as a highly skilled migrant, that I was, who adapted to working life and who had to adapt to a different culture and a different language that was not my own. I could use that to support others in similar situations on a similar level when they get back, when they arrive in my own culture, my own country. So that was the motivation for me to do something new and to actually put that to use.
Right.
And here we are.
Thank you for sharing that. And my next question follows, with your experience in the majority of your time spending between Austria and the UK, what are some possible misconceptions that you observed about people having about Austria and the UK?
I've got to say, I got a little bit hung up on the misconceptions. A very obviously there are a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into when you jump to and fro, and when you're English and then you come to Austria and you call everyone du because you know conjugating in the third person plural is harder, and you put off your professor by calling him du, and you don't think any of it. But the idea of misconception is interesting, because I think the biggest misconception that we all can have when we change cultures is that, and change cultures within Europe, as I've done, is that the Austrians and the English are not that different, and that approach that we all are global citizens, which we are, who are very apt and very good in adapting to the ever-changing surroundings. I think that's a bit of a misconception, because we may have similar values when it comes to, say, democracy or human rights or the role of history, but already when we talk about how much the state, for example, should be involved in and should be able to interfere with the individual's life, there are great differences in the UK or in Austria, because the English and the Anglo-American society is a very individualized society, whereas in Germany and Austria we have a very strong focus on the social, also written into the constitution, into the state, and that affects the way people are with each other. You can in England you can live your life in your little house with your fences left, right, and center. People will leave you, neighbors will leave you alone and will keep a distance and will not look at you when you're in your garden and you're 10 meters away from them. Here in Austria, people stare at you, or you feel as if people are staring at you, and they don't mean anything by it. So we are in each other's lives much more when it's all about strangers. And I thought it can't be, my misconception was, I think we can't be that different. We're all, this is still the north of Europe, the south of Europe, and I think that I was wrong there. There were many more differences that came up eventually and took years to consolidate, get used to. Yeah. So
there was a very interesting point you mentioned, which also is actually new to me. And you said that in the constitution, it's written in Austria and Germany that they focus on the collective society, right? So that's something new for me.
I mean the soziale Marktwirtschaft. That's a model that we work by in Germany and Austria, and that excuse me, and that makes sure that in a way that the social and the collective and greater good is always there somehow in political decisions, whereas and that this is very simplified. Obviously, I'm not a political historian, but in more individualist, pragmatic societies like in the UK, you have the individual that has a very strong standing and is actually the model of the human being. So the social is there, but first comes the individual's rights. Freedom is the freedom of the individual is very, very important, and this has an effect on public life, on how people I would like to say how people treat each other in everyday situations too. I think how fast they are when they approach you and tell you that you're not supposed to cross the road, the red light. Here in Vienna, they tell you they may tell you off for doing something that isn't against the greater good, and they're much faster in doing that. Yeah. So
moving from this question of misconceptions, how about let's turn a direction towards perhaps experiences that impacted you or influenced you in Austria or the UK that kind of gave you or added you a new perspective or value for you? Was there particular experiences or stories that you found there?
That's a very difficult question for me to answer, I have to say. Can you give me an example of an experience that may have changed you? And maybe I can you give me one?
Sure. So, for example, I could mention my experiences going back to China. So I go practically every summer, but every single time I kind of have to refresh or kind of reconstruct myself in terms of my values, because it's very much different in general to the European culture. I'm generalizing here, but let's say that. So
that's what we do in intercultural theory, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
We have to.
So one experience that I would say in China I had is the fact that they value so much on the hierarchy. So basically what I mean is that I can't be so comfortable or be so loud or act the same way I do with, for example, my peers or even people that I do in Europe, but I really have to physically, verbally, and also my tone, I have to tone it down when I'm with somebody who is of a greater position and also a higher age than me. So oftentimes when I go back, like I have to automatically adjust, or they view me as somebody who is disrespectful, who is not educated, because it's a common unsaid rule that we are very, very respectful to people who are higher than our, age-wise as well as position-wise. So that's always something that I keep in mind. And there were a couple events happening there. But for example, I could tell one, which is I was sitting in a family, like a Chinese dinner, like family circle. And I was basically like talking a bit loud and explaining a story to my friend next to me. And then everybody was like silent, like nobody talked. And then I realized after like looking at everybody, moving my head towards everybody else, that they were all looking at me. And in that sense, that was their indirect impliance of saying, this is not in a way what, Chinese people are used to, and it's not appropriate, I guess, in some ways, of expressing yourself directly and occupying the whole collective space, right? Because it's not supposed to be that you're the only one talking, but we should talk to every single person in that room. And so I learned that from a very young age, and I'm very thankful that I did. So that was one experience that kind of connoted to me how important this hierarchy is.
So you're talking about how you have to become a pro almost in modulating your talking style, your communication style when you're there, as opposed to here. Because there are quite distinct differences in the way people people organize their lives, the communication, the everyday communication. This is I see what you mean now. I see what you mean. Probably that takes me back to the idea of the misconception. I think the differences are not that obvious between the UK now and Austria. Perhaps one example could be the way I react now when I'm being talked to in a more confrontative way, or a way that I interpret as confrontative, when it actually isn't. The way we talk to each other in Austria is very direct. And many people will, many English speakers will say that Austrians are just rude the way they talk, because they are so forward and they're so straight, and they don't mean to be at all. But funnily enough, I've adapted to the indirectness in the past, decades. I've adapted to this indirectness so much that I find it now, my reverse culture shock period, I find it interesting that I react to somebody who's very straightforward and coming at me and addressing me directly in a very, perhaps in dialect. I sometimes feel as if I'm being attacked when I'm not. Does that make sense at all? So I'm not.
Yes, it does.
My bodily reaction is, oh, this is not appropriate. There's something going on that's not supposed to be like that in a public space with a stranger. If they come at me that way, they want to confront me, and they don't. They're just being their normal Austrian selves. Yeah. And that's perhaps something that I realized you learn when you live abroad for a long time.
Yeah.
Not when you. Yeah, sure.
So follow up to that is, out of curiosity, which experiences, or if it was a particular country that influenced your indirectness or your transformation from direct to indirect, was that your experience in the UK?
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely. I mean, I've spent most of my time in the UK, so that was definitely the way of engaging with strangers or people you don't know. It's in the communicative situation is a very, very careful, generally friendly, smiling, diplomatic way. And you may think of the other person whatever you want to think, but this is how you do it. And we have a different situation in Austria, where people are direct and they will make jokes. And and it's funny that you can unlearn your own cultural, as you were just saying, you have to rejig and reset yourself every time you go back to China and then come back. You can unlearn and learn again how to operate in your own cultural origin once you've been away for a long time or have had different experiences. I mean, again, your experience is very different to mine, and the difference is.
I like to use the word chameleonize, which I often find myself doing when I'm placed in a circumstance or a country that's different than me, or sensitive to what others from that country are, that same type of feedback, verbally or physically. So I use chameleonize for that. Yes. Yeah, it's not a word I believe not yet. Yes.
It's a neologism, and I think you can introduce it to the discourse, and it'll one day they'll say, "That's what we said."
Great. So my next question is then the last in this career section, which is, as a German coach, what would be one tip or recommendation you would offer to people who are learning German and already have a foundation? So what was like one tip or one recommendation that you would have?
Oh, that's again a difficult question, because there's no blanket approach. Every learner is different, and everyone needs different things at any given time. However, perhaps I'd say you have to identify what you need most at that specific time. I personally work with it's a method. I call it a method. Well, I work and use 4 aspects that I want to focus on with different people at different moments in time, depending on what they need. And the one is planning, so preparing for important communication exchanges. If your German is already very good, but you know that you've got an important conversation coming up, you can plot a script. You can write a script, and you can script a chat as you think it'll go, or you can gather vocabulary. The second one is knowledge, your background knowledge. You need to know what you can expect from somebody who speaks German in terms of intercultural responses. you need to know, you can build up that background knowledge if you feel you still need you get the wrong responses, or you get responses you can't decode on a non-verbal level. That's something where background knowledge comes in. It helps you to expect a certain reaction eventually. Practice is the third one. Practice obviously is a key to language learning, and there is no learning without practice, and that's the area of grammar exercises and drills. Once you know what you still need to work on, there are some aspects of German that never go away and that keep coming back to learners of German, and that's syntax, passive, conjunctive, the tenses, the use of tenses in the past, and you can practice that, and you can practice with a buddy. I think it's always excellent to have someone who is a native speaker who actually gives you the time and is patient and corrects you, but practices speaking with you. You can practice your planned conversations with them. You can have chats with them. And the last one, and this goes hand in hand, is immersion. You have to immerse yourself and use every opportunity to hear, read, listen, and to speak German in particular. So Nachrichten in einfacher Sprache are very good to build up Wortschatz. I don't know whether you've come across that at all. Many news outlets have that button now, and you can actually get the news in the normal speed and the normal complexity when it comes to syntax, and then you can get some of these news again in simplified language, more simplified German, and that's actually quite useful to enlarge.
I did not know that. That is very interesting.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that's helpful. That's something that you can find on various websites. Also in Germany, they do that now. Immerse yourself. Read whatever you like to read. Read something that is actually engaging. I've had many students who said, I don't want to read my favorite author in German because then I lose my will to live, and it spoils it for me. I buy that. I understand, but there can be shorter text, magazines, blogs, what have you. Immerse yourself in the language and sing. If you can sing, write your own lyrics, write your own songs, and sing along. These are some general tips, but obviously, yeah.
Very, very helpful. Thank you very much, Heidi. That was very comprehensive once again. And just like out of curiosity, a question from my side again is, I've heard from a lot of my Austrian and also German friends that they themselves sometimes find it hard to navigate German grammar, and they often make mistakes themselves. Is this something that you've also heard from your side?
Oh yeah, that can happen. We have a German standard that we adhere to when we write, especially when we write more complex text for research publications, or at university where you have to write your Seminararbeit. You have to make sure that you get your cases right. And language is a living thing. It always changes, and that makes it difficult for foreign learners of a language, but it also makes it difficult for ourselves, because what was usus, as we say, of 2 or 3 decades ago is not anymore. And yes, there is a really good book by Bastian Sick. Der Dativ ist dem Genitiv sein Tod. I don't know whether you've ever come across it, but that's one example. Cases. Many people don't use the genitive anymore because it sounds too hoity-toity and elaborate. But the genitive, des Hauses, is a wonderful case, and we have to keep it. Nobody, for example, nobody says das ist when we speak German, everyday German. So das ist der Ball von dem Max. Instead of das ist Max's Ball oder Veronikas Ball. Das ist der Ball von der Veronika. This is how we would put it in spoken German. Yeah. And yes, it can become an issue if you if you then are forced to put your German into writing, and that's where style comes in, and you have to modulate and say, yeah, it does exist. So it's difficult for everyone, actually.
I feel relieved hearing that, because I'm still trying to navigate the grammar here.
Totally. There are ways of tackling grammar issues, but
yes,
we can talk about this some other time.
And now moving on to the topic of TCKs, which I also kind of explained last time with you about my project here, raw culture. I always get confused by how to hold my hand here. The idea, as you know, is for me to create a community for TCKs and do it through my web platform and soon to be mobile application. And my question follows, did you know about TCKs before I told you? And if not, after I explain it to you a bit, what kind of a potential do you see in TCKs?
Right. I'm by far, I'm really not an expert on TCKs. I knew about the concept before, and I knew about the book by David Pollock, Ruth van Ricken, and Georg Pflüger on TCKs. I think they were the pioneers who came up with the idea, and I do have this in my library, so I know as much. It's called
Third Culture Kids. Oh, that's wonderful. You have that.
I do have it, yes.
Okay.
And I really find it extremely encouraging and important, and I'm really glad for all the TCKs out there that finally this century at some point people got together and looked at this existence, this way of existing between cultures, because it really is something very fascinating, but also something very difficult, I gather. I find it interesting and moving that TCKs often have to learn to lose what it means to lose someone, friends, or the environment they're used to at an early age. I think that is something that most of us never go through. We grow up for the first 18 years mainly in very stable environments that are always the same, and we get used to that and we learn how to go about. And many TCKs don't have that, because to move around, they have to learn how to lose things quickly and have to shut it down, because that's what you do when you have to move away. And I find it moving and important to know and important to aware of that TCKs then carry an idea of home. This is when I talk to them. I've got many in my among my friends and also some in my family. The idea of home that can never correspond with reality, because the idea of home as you knew it, that does not exist. The minute you leave, it doesn't exist anymore, and you cannot go back to it that easily or at all. I think that is quite something to swallow. Cultural visitors, they are.
You know a lot more about TCKs than you said, so you know a lot more than other people that I've interviewed. So that's great. Thank you for summarizing that for us. The next question kind of follows. You already mentioned some aspects, which is that TCKs, they feel alone and they feel like they don't know who they are. They don't have a place to identify with. So in this question then, how do you think TCKs sharing their cultural experiences and stories growing up would help then other TCKs in their journey? As this is what I'm trying to kind of create with my raw culture project, where they have this place and community to share and exchange.
I think you can see from your project, it is growing by the minute, and it's hitting a nerve, and people are supporting the idea and are contributing to it. And of course, as somebody who deals with literature and works in literature, I love stories, and I think stories help us. I know stories help us to be social, and you're doing exactly that because we share something with someone else. They help us to empathize. when we read it, and we can empathize with someone else in a safe environment. Because if you don't want to anymore, you can stop reading the story or stop listening to it. They educate, and they make us, in a way, they make us equal in our humanity for a specific time, for the duration of listening to it and reading it. So they are empowering for the reader and for the person who actually learns through it. At the same time, I think they're empowering for the people who tell them, because you need a voice, and the more voices you get that actually share a similar experience, the clearer it becomes that you are a community. There is a community, there's a sense of community, even though these people live in all different kinds of worlds, in different kinds of Europe, or probably in different, empowering not only for the reader, but it's also empowering for the person who actually tells the story, because they may feel they are one voice, and then they realize that there are many other voices that tell the same story, or tell a similar story and share the similar experience, and they may not, they are a community, although they are not in the same place, or may not be in the same place. And I was asking you, do you know where your contributors are placed? Do you have an idea?
Yes, they are all over.
All over the place, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So some statistics, I would say, like based off of that, there's people from the US, different states as well, people from Indonesia, from India, from Hungary, from Austria, of course, and also from China. So they're also kind of spread out like peanut butter in that sense. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is you are creating, that's a community aspect that you're bringing in. You're not the only voice anymore. There are others, and they're not in the same place, but that doesn't matter, because they are everywhere. That's the positive side and the good side of being a global citizen.
Yes.
Which is who we are. So
to sum it up. So Heidi, there's one last question that I want to ask. We also discussed this before, so if you want to add to what you've said before, go for it. If you perhaps already said the stories that kind of impacted you and can't think of anything right now, that's also fine. But the question is there like one story, or I don't know, it doesn't have to be that one particular one, but maybe one story right now that you can think of which kind of impacted you a certain way and influenced you, a cultural story?
A cultural story, I think I've learned, and it's probably a bit far-fetched, but you decide whether this is a cultural story, a cultural learning or not. I heard in the UK, I heard that police undergo a specific training when they interrogate somebody, and that training entails that they are not allowed to ever assume anything when they interrogate someone. They can't assume the gender, they can't assume the background, they can't assume. They're not supposed to assume anything. They have to interrogate very empathetically and very, very carefully. And it really struck me as something that is not done enough. I think that is probably not a cultural story, but that's something I learned from the UK police training, which is, I suppose, cultural enough. Never assume. You know nothing about someone's life story, and never assume from the way a person looks or the way they are standing in front of you, the way they dress. Never assume that you know what their background is, what the challenges they're facing are. Ask and listen. I think this assuming, we're doing it far too often, and this is fueling our prejudice and fueling our stereotyping and fueling our stereotypizations of people. Never assume. I've been taking that's another it's not a story really, but a snippet that I take away. I've been taking for all sorts of nationalities in the UK. I've been called Greek and Italian and what have you, never Austrian, and I quite love that because it's only when people asked it turned out where I was originally coming from. And I quite like that, because it shows you again, we know nothing about the others until we ask and until we engage with them. So yeah, that's a learning, I suppose, I can take away. It's not a story, sorry.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much. I think it's a very important quality for all of us to know. And for everybody hearing, I think it's also really important to also kind of conceptualize and implement this into our own lives as well. And even though I have to say humans, they're automatically like, we have our own biases automatically, but just having and keeping in mind that we can work on it and we can slowly adapt step by step, that is the first step we should take. So before we close down, I would like to give the space for you to share some of your contact details or your website or social media.
Well, pretty much. You can find me on my website. That's also the name of my business, thinkgerman.at. You can contact me if you've got any questions about my services at heide@thinkgerman.at, and you can find me under my name on LinkedIn. I am otherwise not on Facebook, not on Instagram at the moment, and not on Twitter, but that may change in the future. Your best shot is to find me via the website or contact me directly. Thank you for that. Thank you for
all of you guys contact her. Thank you once again, Heidi, for joining me for this interview. And until we meet again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maram.